So, when you think about the world's great economic rivalries, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's a pretty simple, two-sided battle. But what if I told you there's a third major player in history? A system built not on profit or on the state, but on divine law. Today, we're going to explore the powerful and, let's be honest, often misunderstood economic blueprint of Shariah.
Right. I mean, the whole clash between capitalism and communism, that basically defined the 20th century. But it's not the whole story, not by a long shot. What happens when you introduce a totally different kind of blueprint into that comparison? One that's founded not on class struggle or market forces, but on very specific moral and divine principles? Well, that's the big question we're digging into. Okay, so before we go any further, let's get on the same page with a core concept: political economy. It sounds academic, but it's actually pretty simple. Think of it as the master blueprint for a society. It dictates everything, from who owns what, to what's considered a fair deal, to the role of the government. Every single society has one, and if you can understand the blueprint, you can understand the society itself.
So with that idea of a blueprint in mind, let's do something really interesting. Let's put 5 of history's most influential economic models side by side and see how they answer the biggest questions a society can face.
And here it is, our master comparison chart. Now, I know that's a lot of information on one screen, so don't worry about reading it all at once. We are absolutely not going to read this like a textbook. Just get a sense of the scope here. We're comparing everything from feudalism to communism, looking at their core ideas, their rules for ownership, even how they structure social class. We're going to use this as our map as we dive into the details.
All right, let's start by looking at what really drives these systems. Their foundational beliefs about morality, money, and power. This is where you can see the blueprints really start to go in different directions.
And wow, the contrast is immediate. On one side, you have the philosophy of a caliphate. It starts with morality. Its stated goals are justice and social welfare, all guided by divine law. Then you look at capitalism, and it starts from a totally different place: individual freedom, the pursuit of profit, and competition. They're literally built on completely different foundations.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Seeing how that philosophy translates to something as basic as who owns what. In this system, God is the ultimate owner of everything. People, well, we're just trustees. And that has this huge practical consequence you can see right here. You can't just hoard agricultural land. If you let it sit there unproductive for 3 years, the state can actually step in and give it to someone who will cultivate it. It's a use it or lose it principle, designed to make sure the land serves the entire community.
And this quote just perfectly illustrates the balance of play. The system isn't against profit at all. Making money through trade and hard work is actually encouraged. But, and this is a big but, that pursuit has firm ethical guardrails. You can't cheat people, you can't hoard essential goods to drive up prices, you can't create monopolies, and crucially, you cannot charge interest, which is known as riba, because it's seen as an inherently exploitative practice.
So you might be wondering, how does the system stop all the wealth from just pooling at the very top? Well, the main tool for that is something called zakat. This isn't a friendly suggestion to donate to charity. No, it's a mandatory 2.5% annual tax on your accumulated wealth and savings. You can think of it as a built-in, perpetual wealth tax that's a core pillar of the economy. It's designed to constantly cycle resources back to those in need and to fund public welfare.
This creates a really different role for the government, too. In the Caliphate model, the ruler's main job is to execute a divine law that already exists. They're an enforcer of justice, not the source of it. Now, contrast that with communism, where the state basically is the economy, controlling every aspect of production and distribution, all from the top down. 2 totally different approaches to power. To make all this trade and taxation work fairly across a massive empire, you need a stable, trustworthy currency. This slide shows how they did it. At first, they just used the coins that were already around. Then they started stamping them with Islamic inscriptions. And finally, around the year 696, the Caliphate established the iconic gold dinar and silver dirham with precise standard weights. This was huge. It stopped fraud in its tracks and created one of the most stable and widely used currencies in the world for centuries.
Okay, so we've looked at the what of these different systems. Now let's place them on a timeline to really understand the when and the where. Let's see how they rose, fell, and sometimes collided over the centuries.
What this timeline shows is pretty amazing, really. It shows 2 parallel histories unfolding. For nearly 1,000 years, while Europe was largely feudal, the caliphates were these buzzing centers of global trade and innovation. Then, starting in the 1600s, you see capitalism begin to rise in Europe, and then it just hits overdrive with the Industrial Revolution. For a very long time, these two worlds were developing on separate tracks, each with its own center of gravity.
But they didn't stay parallel forever. This was the turning point. By the 1800s, the economic and military power of the industrialized capitalist nations in Europe was just immense. Through colonialism, these two systems clashed directly, and the older land-based Muslim empires were largely dismantled or brought under colonial rule. This completely reshaped the political and economic map of the world.
So after comparing these blueprints and tracing their long, complicated histories, what are the big takeaways? What does all of this mean for how we think about the world today?
Well, first, it's pretty obvious that the world has more economic models to draw from than just the two we always talk about. Second, we can see that a system that prioritizes social welfare and puts ethical guards on commerce isn't some radical new invention. It was a central feature of Islamic political economy for over a millennium. And maybe the most important lesson is this: history isn't a simple story of one system neatly replacing another. These economic worlds grew up side by side, then competed and ultimately collided. And the shockwaves from that collision still define so much of our world today.
Which, of course, leaves us with a final question to think about. As we all face modern challenges, I'm talking about inequality, financial instability, and huge debates about ethics and business, what can we learn by looking back at these different blueprints for society? What forgotten ideas might still hold some relevance for us today? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining this explainer.